questions. Secretary General.
Prime Minister Kallas, Kaja, welcome back to NATO. It's great to have you here. We are only 2 weeks from the NATO summit in Vilnius, where we'll take far-reaching decisions to bolster our deterrence and defense and step up our support for Ukraine. The mutiny by Wagner mercenaries at the weekend is an internal matter for Russia. At the same time, it demonstrates once again that President Putin's illegal war in Ukraine is a big strategic mistake. It has deepened existing divisions and created new tensions in Russia. But we should not underestimate Russia. We must continue to support Ukraine, and we must keep our defenses strong. To send a clear message to Moscow and Minsk that NATO will protect every inch of Allied territory. Since 2014, we have significantly reinforced our presence and readiness, from the Black Sea to the Baltic Sea, including in Estonia. NATO's multinational battle group in Tapa, led by the United Kingdom, helps to deter any aggression. Just last month, Exercise Spring Storm demonstrated our ability to reinforce our presence in Estonia up to brigade-size level. Fighter jets and air defences from allies also help to protect Estonian skies. And allies have agreed a new rotational model for air and missile defence, allowing for swift transition from air policing to air defence. At the summit, we will take the next steps with new regional plans, assigned forces and capabilities, and enhanced exercise programme, all backed by over 300,000 troops on high readiness. Support for Ukraine is another top priority for the summit. I welcome Estonia's leading role in providing critical aid and rallying the international community behind the Ukrainian people. We need to step up even more. At the summit, we will agree a multi-year package of assistance and upgrade our political ties with Ukraine. This will bring Ukraine closer to its rightful place in NATO. We also need to invest more in our security. At the summit, I expect we will agree on a more ambitious defence investment pledge with 2% of GDP as the floor, not the ceiling. Here too, Estonia is leading by example, investing more than 2% of GDP in defence. The Vilnius summit will be the first with Finland as a member, and we're working to finalise Sweden's accession as well. Therefore, I have called another meeting of senior officials from Turkey, Sweden and Finland next Thursday. The time is now to welcome Sweden as a full member of NATO. Let me finally mention Kosovo, which was also addressed in our meeting. Our KFOR mission continues to fulfill its UN mandate impartially. We call on both parties to refrain from anything that can further escalate tensions and return immediately to the EU-facilitated dialogue, which is the only way forward. So, Prime Minister Kallas, Kaja, once again, welcome to NATO. It's great to have you here, and I appreciate very much your leadership. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear Jens, dear Secretary General, dear journalists. We had a very good discussion, and I'm really pleased to be here in NATO headquarters today. We are living through turbulent times, and I really thank you, Jens, for having a principled stance and building allied unity throughout these difficult times. It is increasingly clear right now that Ukraine is winning this war, with the help of transatlantic family right behind it. And it is clear that the sooner Putin gets that it's losing this war, the faster Russia will return to Russia. It is our joint responsibility to prove him by our continued support to Ukraine and our unity and decision-making. We also discussed preparations for the NATO's Vilnius summit. First, the permanent peace in Europe can only be possible when we end the grey zones in the security of Europe. Grey zones are a breeding ground for instability and wars. It is experience of my own country that NATO's membership is the safest, cheapest, and the most credible way of deterring Russia. Russia's aggression against Ukraine has also proved this point very clearly. The only thing that can end the cycle of aggressions against its neighbors is NATO membership. Hence, for peace, we need Ukraine in NATO. In Bucharest summit, allies agreed that Ukraine would become a member. This should not remain a hollow promise. What we need now is to define a practical path to meet this goal. And we need to send a strong message of hope to the Ukrainian soldiers in the trenches that with NATO membership on the horizon, they are fighting their last war with Russia. And second, we made historic decisions in Madrid summit. These were truly significant changes in the policy and also in the mindset. Now we need to put these decisions in practice. All allies need to continue to invest in security. This will make our transatlantic bond even stronger. By the time allies convene in Washington to celebrate this NATO's 75th anniversary next summer, we Europeans must also demonstrate the strategic leap not only in thinking, but also in real deliverables. For that, the defense of the NATO's European allies needs a truly decisive lift. We need to step up combat effectiveness, and we need deterrence credible enough to avoid the war and stop Russia's cycle of aggressions. For that, we need to increase defense investment spendings. For a credible deterrence and defense, it is key to close existing gaps in our capabilities and also in our stockpiles. Our long-term aim should be 2.5% of GDP. I know from experience how difficult it is for democratically elected leaders to argue for increasing costs on defense. In Estonia, we are increasing the defense expenditure to 3% of our GDP, and that requires raising taxes. And I can tell you, it's not popular. But time matters, and sending out right signals also matters. Just to give you an example from my own country's history, in 1933, the defense budget increase lacked political support in Estonia. In 1939, the tenfold boost of defense investments was already too late. None of the equipment made it to the time to defend us in the Second World War and from the occupation that followed. Third, Russia has tried to blackmail NATO away from its neighborhood. The outcome has been the opposite. Finland joined the alliance, and I hope Sweden will be joining as well. So in conclusion, it is a long war that Russia is fighting. It will not be over until Russia accepts and respects Ukraine's statehood. Developments within Russia should not blur our focus and resolve. Aggression must end in defeat. And long-term European security requires Ukrainian membership in NATO. We have to work on the wording how to get there. For peace that lasts, we also need accountability. I know that this is not NATO's topic, but I really want to stress this. We need the accountability for the crime of aggression, for Russia's leadership. Without the accountability, Russia's cycle of aggression, Russia's cycle of constantly attacking its neighbors will just continue and will never stop. Thank you.
We'll take a few questions. Estonian public broadcaster in the middle. Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity. I'll ask two questions from both of you. My name is Josep Berg from Estonian Public Broadcasting. The first question is if those new regional defense plans make sure that realistically the Allied territory is defended in case of conflict from the first meter, from day zero, until the victory against any enemy. And the second question is if Latvia and Lithuania should be fortified in the light of the presence of Wagner troops in Belarus. Thank you.
First of all, we have to understand that NATO already has plans and capabilities in place to defend every ally and every inch of allied territory. And then we are further strengthening our deterrence and defense, partly by the decision we made in Madrid, and then the implementation and the follow-up that will happen now in Vilnius. And this is about assigning specific forces to specific territories and also to increase readiness of our forces. The main purpose of this is actually not to fight the war, but to prevent the war. And deterrence has worked for more than 75 years, or for almost 75 years for this alliance, since we were founded in 1949. And therefore, this is partly a question of forward presence. We have increased our presence also in the Baltic region, but also about high readiness, the ability to quickly reinforce, and pre-positioned equipment. And then we have to remember that the capabilities we can move most quickly is air and naval forces, which is also part of the deterrence in the Baltic region. So yes, we are constantly assessing the need for presence of ground troops across the whole alliance, including in the Baltic region. But I think it's extremely important to understand that our ability to defend every inch is also about our ability to reinforce and have a credible deterrence, and that's exactly what NATO is about, and that will be also demonstrated in Vilnius. Then on the Wagner forces, well, I think it's too early to draw any final conclusion. So what kind of consequences that will have? The mutiny, the events we saw are internal Russian matters. Then maybe we are following and monitoring what's going on very closely. We have seen that some of these forces may be deployed to Belarus. But again, I think it's too early to draw any final conclusions. The most important thing is that we are sending a very clear message to any potential adversary, including Moscow and Minsk, that we are there to protect and defend every inch of Allied territory against any threat. So we have increased our presence. We will further strengthen our deterrence and defense at the Vilnius summit, and then we'll continue to monitor exactly what happens with the Wagner forces.
Mm-hmm. As it was addressed for me as well, the defense plans, I think they're good. We also need to make work in practice, and that is what we are doing. That the combat readiness of the troops is really not a word on the paper, but actually in real life, and that actually requires the defense investments of all the allies to increase as well, to be ready to fulfill the warehouses regarding ammunition, the equipment necessary. But I'm also I agree what was said, that alliance is ready to defend every inch of its territory. What comes to Belarus, we have considered Belarus as a co-aggressor in this war. So nothing has changed in this regard. We know that Belarus, as Russia, is unpredictable and it's dangerous, and this hasn't changed. So clearly our stance, our forward defense stance hasn't changed in this regard as well. I think we are also ready for any development.
Delphi? Delphi, I guess please first. Thank you.
Hello, Herman Gelonis from Delphi in Estonia. Question to both of you about the pathway to membership for Ukraine. I've been speaking to some officials, and it seems that rather than getting a pathway to membership in Vilnius, this will be decided upon later in Washington. So what is the most positive scenario that is realistic for Ukraine in Vilnius, and what would an actual pathway look like?
Well, so first of all, I think it's too early to pre-announce the outcome of the Vilnius summit. There are ongoing consultations, as there always will be when we have important decisions to make. But I'm absolutely confident that at the Vilnius summit, allies will find common ground also on how to address Ukraine's membership aspirations. And we have to remember that allies actually agree on many important messages and positions regarding Ukraine and membership of NATO. We all agree that NATO's door is open. We have demonstrated that recently by inviting Finland and Sweden. We all agree that Ukraine will become a member of this alliance, and we all agree that it's for the NATO allies and Ukraine to decide when the time is right to invite Ukraine to be a member of the alliance. But perhaps the most important thing we agree on is that the most urgent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe. Because if President Putin wins this war, then there is no more membership issue to be discussed at all. So the main focus should be how to ensure that Ukraine prevails, and that's the precondition for any meaningful discussion about further membership. Let me add one more thing. We are going to strengthen our practical support, which will bring Ukraine closer to NATO, a multi-year program for making Ukraine fully interoperable with NATO forces is an important step, and we're also discussing how to further strengthen the political ties, including by potentially agreeing a NATO-Ukraine Council.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I have not much to add. We have to work on the wording so that everybody is on board, and the worries that some allies have regarding further steps, and also the hope that we should give to Ukrainians, as I'm really confident that any grey zone in Europe is a source of conflict and war, and actually the only security guarantee that really works is NATO, and I can tell this by my own country's history. The reason we are not living through some really dark times right now is because we are in NATO, and that is important. And that is also important for the prosperity of European continent, because if you don't have wars, you have investments, you have economic security. So it is in our interest that we find this pathway. But the wording is still being working out, and don't want to somehow spoil the surprise of the Vilnius summit.
Last but not least, Deutsche Welle.
Javelle, thank you. I wanted to drill down on my colleague's question on military mobility. Prime Minister Kallas, you said famously almost exactly a year ago that you feared the Baltic states could be overrun and that it would take NATO 180 days to kick out whoever's forces who might be overrunning you. Are you convinced that military mobility has moved forward now? Not just that you have stockpiles somewhere else, but that you could get them to a crisis spot fast enough. Those are part of the regional plans. And Secretary General Stoltenberg, are you disappointed that at the budgeting that the EU has given this project, it was slashed to practically nothing? It was going to be a big flagship cooperation project for NATO and the EU. And do you think you could get the forces there fast enough? Has Turkey agreed to these regional plans now so that mobility... Thank you. My colleagues are nodding, so we all want these answers. Is military mobility really going to take a big step at Vilnius? Thanks.
Yes, this is a big issue. First of all, we have moved from the deterrence posture to defense posture, which means that we are not in a way of, conquering the territories back or liberating the territories afterwards, but we are ready to defend the territories from the first minute and the first centimeter. Of course, there's room for some development regarding the military mobility, but what I want to stress now is that we have Finland in NATO. That changes the whole picture, because of the military mobility, not only making us as a peninsula in terms of NATO, but actually being in the middle. So the help could come from different ways. So I'm pretty sure that we have moved from the situation where we were a year ago by the good decisions that we made in Madrid, and also the execution of those plans, and now going further with those plans as well. So of course there is room for development. We have to do more, but it is still much better, the situation.
NATO has, over the last years, since 2014, implemented the biggest reinforcement of our collective defence in a generation. An important part of that has been and continues to be military mobility. Because to be able to reinforce quickly is a critical part of the way we are providing deterrence and the way we can reinforce and deter any aggression against any NATO ally. So what has happened over the last years is really a significant also improvement of military mobility. There has been huge investments in infrastructure, in military transport and logistic capacity, more pre-positioned supplies and equipment. And also, of course, we are working very closely with the European Union. I will meet actually the European Union. I will be in the European Council tomorrow together with Kaja and the other EU leaders. And military mobility has been part of this cooperation. But this is not only dependent on the budgets of the European Union. This is very much financed by the national budgets for investments in military capabilities to ensure mobility, but also in civilian infrastructure, which is important to ensure military mobility. Then this is something we not only do in words, but also in deeds. We have the battle groups. We are actually now exercising the ability to scale them quickly up to brigade size levels. I returned from Estonia this week, where we had a big exercise demonstrating exactly that. We had earlier exercise in Estonia to scale up the British battle group. And an important part of that is to exercise and demonstrate military mobility to get these forces quickly in to the territories, the countries we want them to be. Then I totally agree with Prime Minister Kallas that the fact that Finland is now a full-fledged member of the alliance also changes the whole security geography in the Baltic Sea region. Because if you look at the map, that has profound consequences for our ability to reinforce, move forces quickly into the Baltic region. And soon Sweden also will be a member. That will further strengthen our ability and make it easier to move and to reinforce forces if needed. We'll continue to work with the European Union, but again, the main task of NATO is not to liberate land. The main task of NATO is to prevent any attack on any NATO ally. And this is deterrence, and it has worked for almost 75 years. We were able to deter aggression against West Berlin. We didn't have any forces in West Berlin, in the middle of East Germany, but deterrence was credible. I'm coming from a country, Norway. The northern part of Norway didn't have any NATO troops at all, but the border with Russia, deterrence worked. So this is partly about forward presence, but it's also about exercising, demonstrating the ability to reinforce in a credible way to prevent any attack at all.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
We will agree the regional plans, I'm absolutely certain.
Thank you very much. This concludes this press conference.